Hi, everybody. Dana Litwin here again, and welcome back to Priceless Advice and Tuesday Tips. I am delighted to welcome first-time guest, and I've been a fan of his for quite a while now, Swim Karim from Philadelphia. Welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hey, it's good to see you. Talking about a good time. Got the leaves are changing colors. There's a change of the season right now, and I think a lot of us are in transitions in more than one ways than one. So it's excited to be here on your YouTube channel. I'm excited to talk to your audience.
Yeah, and you also run a podcast, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I want to
Hmm.
get into some of your background because you share a background with. You had worked for Red Cross for quite a while. I've
Hmm.
had a lot of other friends who've worked with that organization, and now you're with Habitat for Humanity,
Hmm.
another great organization where I know a bunch of people across the country and around the world with both of those organizations. So, what drew you to the career path of being a leader of volunteers, and particularly in these kind of disaster emergency services and then housing services? Like, what
Hmm.
sparked your career?
It all really started back when I was a teenager. It was around that time I had actually moved from Philadelphia to Charlotte, North Carolina. Shout out to the Queen City. And when you go from living in the Northeast, Middle Atlantic to living in the South, everything's just a little bit different, right? Everything's just a little bit different. And so when I moved down there with my mother, this was in 1999, 2000, something like that. It was around my teenage years where I knew I wanted to be able to meet new people, but I didn't know the best avenue. And my mother, she actually worked at a hospital in North Carolina, Carolina's Medical Center, CMC. And so she said, you can volunteer there. And that was really my first spark and intro into the nonprofit space, specifically with volunteering. So I was the person where if after you had a baby, they push you from the elevator to your car. I was that teenager, and that's what I was doing. So that was my start as a volunteer, and it just kind of grew from there. Once I hit high school, I was a junior civitans. I was a Red Cross club member as a high schooler, and after being into the high school space, I actually went to college specifically because of my background in volunteering. I had done so much volunteering, I was able to get a fair amount of scholarships. And so I went to a college in North Carolina called Warren Wilson College. I attended that college for 4 years and I was a part of what's called their service learning department. So, as you know, Dana,
Mhm.
if you're on a college or a university, you may have a civic engagement group, a service learning group, a community engagement group, whatever the term that college or university uses. And so that was where I would work at the campus, like work study, helping other students volunteer so they could graduate from the college. And that was really the beginning of it.
Wow, so you're what we consider a lifer. You kind of started in medical and hospital settings, and that seems like a natural crossover to Red Cross and their different kinds of services,
Hmm.
and then getting into humanity. And you've lived across the country, you've worked across the country, and I can imagine the culture shock of going from northeast to south, especially.
Hmm.
And what have you appreciated about those points in your journey, if even if there was a cultural shift or some challenges, like what did you learn kind of early in that career and that college placement about leading volunteers or helping people find volunteer roles that
Hmm.
still sticks with you today?
I would say the thing I learned the most is the respect and the understanding of different cultures is paramount.
Hmm.
Here's a fun fact, and they say what 40% of all, like 90% of all statistics are made up. So I don't know the exact percentage, Dana, but I remember reading a study a couple of years ago that said 40% of all Americans live within 1 mile of the zip code in which they grew up in. So right now, there are people that are listening to this episode who probably have, they have family or kids or people in their lives, and they, to one degree or another, are trying to be around people that are accepting, that are open, that have the ability to really grow in so many ways. And for me, moving from Pennsylvania to North Carolina to this day continues to be probably the most transformational moment in my life. I was 12 years old when that happened, and it really changed what I knew. Because again, growing up in Philadelphia, it's a major metropolitan city, right? You know, it's the sixth largest in America. It's like the 11th largest in North America, something like that. But it's still very small, right? Even if, you know, you're in San Francisco, how often are you really, really traveling to different areas? It could be great. It could be maybe not as great. For me, being able to have that move as a preteen really changed my ideas of what I knew because I don't tell anyone, Dana. I thought everyone in the South was on horses. That's how ignorant I was because you only know what you know.
Right.
But being in a brand new environment changed everything. So when it comes to volunteering, the reason why I say culture is so paramount is because if you have a one aspect, if you know or really only see the world through one lens, you're limiting yourself as it relates to the way you can manage or be around volunteers. And that's why I always say, like, volunteering is really a stepping stone into other people's worlds,
Totally.
right?
I love that.
When we come together as volunteers, we put ourselves into a position of understanding not only the clients that we're working with, not only the other volunteers, but an understanding of who we are and our place in the world. And I think that is what makes us better humans and better volunteers.
And I totally agree. Having that open mindedness and having something like that happen at kind of preteen, edge of the teenage years, that's
Hmm.
such a formative time in life. What have you seen in, so we're in a point right now in the world where, or in the USA, where FEMA's being cut, AmeriCorps being sliced and diced up, and
Hmm.
there's a reduction in the social safety net. There's a huge, contraction where a lot of people are being left without any safety net at all. And what do you see as the role potentially, like volunteers can't do everything and nonprofits shouldn't have to do everything that we pay taxes for our government to do for us. So as we're each in this sector where we're trying to help people and clients and communities
Hmm.
that have less and less and less things to rely on from older institutions or government systems. Have you seen a big
Hmm.
uptick in the last couple of years or more recently of housing demand or how Habitat for Humanity might be responding, or just in your own observations and doing your podcast and talking to other experts and getting the landscape scan of what's going on right now?
Okay, there's a lot there.
That's a big
Let's
question.
take
We can unpack.
right. Let's take a step back here
Yeah,
because one of the things that I talk about on my nonprofit, the Nonprofit Insider podcast, quite a bit that I think a lot of people in the nonprofit space don't really understand is that a nonprofit is a tax designation
right,
from the United States.
right.
There are 29 different tax designations, if I'm not mistaken. I always forget if it's 29 or 27, but I believe it's 29 different tax designations from the United States. And the whole purpose of that is to really hammer in on a social need
Hmm.
that maybe isn't being addressed by the private sector or the government. And I always
Hmm.
say it's like a three-legged stool, at least within the United States, where
Right.
you have the government, you have private sector, and then you have the nonprofits. And that's kind of what most people work within, right?
Hmm.
10% are working in nonprofit, 8% are working in government, and the rest, for the most part, are working in the for-profit space. So when you look at it through that dynamic, you really have to understand that nonprofits oftentimes are filling in a need that maybe we're not seeing in other forms of business or other forms of entrepreneurship or in government. So when you see things like changes to different social groups or social networks, like you said, from the federal government, you're going to see a lot of nonprofits try to fill in that gap.
Hmm.
Volunteers cannot do it all
Right,
because nonprofits cannot do it all.
right.
If we keep that in mind, then we are able to move forward in the right way. And it's kind of a bit of a cliche. You hear the story of the boy, he's walking in the beach, or the girl walking in the beach, and they pick up the seashell and they throw it in the ocean. You're from California, and you
Yeah,
know this.
yeah,
And they go, "Why are you doing that? You're not going to be able to help them all." And then they say, I was able to help that one starfish. It's
right,
kind of the same thing where I think there's a mentality for us in this particular nonprofit space. We see a lot of things that exist in the world that just honestly are just unjust.
right.
They're unjust, they're unfair, they're suffering, there's undue suffering. And there are a lot of people that are in positions that we think as a society we should not have. There are issues and concerns that exist that we have the money, the resources, and we really do have the knowledge to curb a lot of these things, but there's a lot of roadblocks for various reasons.
Hmm.
But if we know that in this particular industry, we can't fix it all, it makes it easier for us as volunteer leaders, and that in turn will make it easier for volunteers.
Yeah, and I'm a big proponent and advocate for mutual aid and, do what you can, where you can, when you can, to the best
Hmm.
of your ability in that moment, and that's going to change from moment to moment. And some people,
Hmm.
everyone can be have a different role to make things better, whether that's hyper local or people are working remote and online, but are trying to do it in a specific cause. And I've seen a lot of in especially the last 5 years. So I've run my YouTube channel since early 2020. I know you started your podcast in 2023ish, and I want to
Hmm.
talk about that journey.
Got it.
But I think that we're being forced as larger institutional organizations and big nonprofits, and you've worked for big
Mm.
nonprofits, I've worked for big
Yep.
nonprofits
Hmm.
and governments and little ones, and there's this idea that, oh, well, if we're working there, I found this idea that's way too common, that if we're working with mutual aid, then we have to absorb them. It's very colonial, absorb them into our systems and our regulations. And I'm the opposite of that. I'm like, no, we have a lot to learn from mutual aid and grassroots and informal volunteering when people do
Hmm.
just early on in COVID, teenagers just started taking groceries to their elder neighbors and they weren't a part of an organization. They ended up starting an
Hmm.
organization to do it because it wasn't happening just in their neighborhood, in their part of town. So I think that's the way that also is a good hope coping mechanism where focus on what you can do, try to do it as consistently or every day as you can for other people, and let other people help you as well, and ask for that help when you need it, and kind of like keep that balance going. Was that
Easier,
part?
and,
Yeah,
and,
go
and those
ahead.
are
Yeah,
and these are
yeah.
easier said than done, right? We
Oh,
know
totally.
this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can say it all day, but getting through to doing it and feeling it, it's not all just like words swimming in the head. It's got to sink down a little deeper into daily actions. But that's a philosophy of like, yeah, we do what we can where we can, and to not get overwhelmed by, like, yeah, it's depressing to watch the news, but if you focus on the good that you can do in your little area or your community, wherever that community is, in person or online, wherever around the world, that's what we're seeing is making a difference and really helping
Hmm.
people day to day. So, what got you inspired to do your podcast? Because as we both know, these kinds of things take a lot of work. For the
Let me
nonprofit
loosen up. Let me loosen up
insider,
my. Hold on. Let me
yeah,
loosen
just
up the
like
tie. Oh my God,
get
getting
comfortable,
hot in here
settle
now.
in.
Jeez, we're getting comfortable now. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. This is actually the third podcast I started.
Oh, okay.
I,
Okay.
I I started my first podcast back in 2012 because this was back when Adam Carolla was
Yeah, I
like the
remember.
biggest. He was like
Yeah.
the biggest podcaster at the time,
Yeah. On
something like
on
that. I said,
Sirius or something. Yeah. Yeah.
I said, this thing is cool. I really like it. But at that point in time, I was just out of college. It was 2 years
Hmm.
out of college. I didn't know up from down. I barely knew left from right. I'm trying to live on my own for the
Yeah.
first time. I got a girlfriend who eventually turned into my wife. So I got all these things that I'm trying to do. So when I created that podcast, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't
Hmm.
know what I was doing, but I always knew I had a big taste for audio.
Yes.
When I was in high school, I was actually on the high school newspaper, right? I sound like one of those people that are like, oh, I was a high school football player. I was on the high school newspaper, and I thought
Throwing the newspaper. Yeah.
my first job was as a paper boy,
Yeah,
funny
there you
enough.
go.
So I said, oh, I when I was in high school, I said, oh, I'm going to be a journalist. But it was very clear at the high school that the newspaper, this was 2006, and the newspaper was going in the opposite direction. So I said, what are some other avenues? And I thought audio. So when I came up with that first podcast, it just bombed because I didn't know what I was doing. Came up with the second one, that didn't work. So I really honed in strong on if it's something I'm going to talk about, and honestly, Dana, I didn't care what I wanted to talk about. I just like the aspect of talking and engaging with people. I love audio. You can clean your people are probably cleaning their house right now and listening to us right now. It's hard to do that when you're watching Game of Thrones,
Right.
or if you're watching a White Lotus, you gotta watch, you
You
gotta
got to
pay attention.
concentrate on that. What's Jennifer Coolidge saying?
Concentrate.
Yeah.
Right.
Anything's
So
possible.
So for me, I really liked audio for so many of those advantages. And I wanted to talk about something that I knew if I had to talk about that same subject for 10 years, what would I talk about?
Hmm.
It was the nonprofit world because I've been in this space and I love it. It's in my heart. So I, instead of those previous podcasts where I just kind of just signed up and just started recording and just haphazardly, I probably spent a solid year and a half really thinking of the idea. Like you said earlier, Dana, when I said, "Oh, talking is easy," it's easier said than done. It had to get deeper. And
Yeah.
so for me, I just sat on it for a very long time. And after 6 months, I said, "This looks good." And then it was like another 6 months. And then I said, well, I planned it out, almost like a business plan. I
Yeah.
planned it
Me
out.
too.
What does
Yeah.
I want to do? And then it was another 6 months of coming up with the name, coming up with the colors, coming up with the logo, and really being sure that for the first, however many episodes, people weren't going to listen. I wasn't going to get the ability to be on really cool channels like yours. How comfortable was I being talking in a silo by myself? And I think that's something a lot of us do in one way or another, where we are really just alone
Yeah.
and we have to figure out when we're in order for our light to shine, we really sometimes have to be in the darkness. And I was in the darkness for a solid 2 years before people started going, oh, wait, Swim, you're with that podcast. And that's how it came to be. All right, I really got to take the
Nepotism.
time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh my
We're
God.
not formal around here. I'm not in a tie. It's all
All
good.
right,
You
let's
know,
do it. Let's do it.
adjust to the climate that you're in.
We're getting in. I'm sweating bullets now. I'm getting ready.
Oh.
Go ahead. More questions. Bring it on,
Bring
Dana.
it
What do we got?
on, lightning round,
What do we
lightning
got?
round. Yeah, so you've had a lot of fun guests, and I learned about you and your podcast. Like I had heard about your podcast and name, just kind of around like, oh, it's interesting. And then our mutual friend Jessica Pang Parks, who I've had on the channel a couple of times, and most recently a few months ago, we met up in person at the Points of Light conference in New Orleans and had great, nibbles and drinks and conversation and had a great time at conference. But she was talking about like you should talk to Swim. Swim's so great. You should talk. So I listened to the episode that she was on and some other episodes, and it's good to meet your expert voiceover talent that that gets us ready to listen on our jogs or walks or working around the house. And of the guests that you've had, I'm not going to ask you to play favorites because that's like
Ooh,
that's
okay.
like choosing a favorite child if you don't just have one. Uh, but I will say, like, what was a topic that you
Mm.
had a guest bring up that kind of was there a moment like that blew your mind, or wow, I haven't thought of it that way? What have been some of your biggest takeaways that you've learned? Because that's the reason I do this is I wanted to talk to my friends and have conversations and meet new people and learn new things. Purely selfish. Yes, there was a business plan. Yes, there was pre-production like you talked about, but that was my core motivation was meeting new people, talking to friends, new and old. And
Mhm.
so what was one of your biggest takeaways in your episodes that you've done so far in Nonprofit
All
Insider.
right. First, let me just say shout out to JPP, Jessica Payne Parks.
JPP, yeah,
Love her. I was
she's the
just in
best.
Toronto a couple of
Yep,
weeks ago. I didn't get a chance to link up with her. I appreciate her dropping my name to you. I really do. It's a big world, but it's a small world all
yeah,
at the same time. For your audience, come closer. I want your audience to come closer
yeah.
for this one.
Everyone's leaning in, leaning in.
I'm gonna bring myself in closer for this. We're having a good time
Yeah,
here.
little dollies
On
are.
episode, yeah. Love all my guests, right? One of the things I think I've seen in the nonprofit space, like with anything, like with government or private, there can be parts of people and workers in that space that can be lethargic, but there can also be parts and people in these spaces that are very ambitious. And I know we've all had times where we said to ourselves, I could do a lot better than the executive director is doing.
Right.
And sometimes it's true. Sometimes the executive director is toxic, they're lazy, they're not good, they don't motivate you, they don't know it. It could be a number of reasons, right? But more often than not, being an executive director is probably one of the hardest jobs in America. On
Easily.
episode 64, I had Pat Adabo. He runs, let me make sure I got the name of it here. He runs Oregon Adaptive Sports out of Mend, Oregon. We went to college together, so we do have a connection there, full disclosure. But we're not like best buds. We just happen to go to college. And so I had reached out to him on LinkedIn and said, hey, I would love to get you on the podcast because he was going to be one of the first executive directors I had on my podcast. The stories he tells in that episode are so good. He is what he would could probably consider himself a small nonprofit. They have an annual budget of about $1.5 million. They have a good reserve, good assets. The 990s are clean. They help individuals basically go out and do sports, snowboarding, skiing, water sports, that type of stuff. Oregon, come on, it's the hub for a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
But he told me about how when COVID started, the conversations he was having, Dana, were tough, hard. I said, Pat, when you go to sleep at night and it's just you and your wife, he's got two twin boys now, but I said, when it's just you and your wife, do you ever stay up at night? What do you tell her about the things you're thinking about? I'm gonna tease that.
Hmm.
I want people to listen to that episode. It's really that good. That's going to lead into my Tuesday tip. I'm going to talk about that here in 20, 25 minutes whenever we finish, Dana.
Hmm.
But the aspect of being an executive director, giving grace, and as much as they lead us, we also have to help them lead us in the process. Very good episode, very good insights into the world of being one of those types of grassroots nonprofits.
And I think that's important to understand. I've seen that happening more and more with webinars by, I think, Alive and CCVA, Council for Certification in Volunteer
Hmm.
Administration. They've featured webinars with, insights from executive directors. And I think I've run organizations as a volunteer and I've run things as management or middle management or upper management and then
Hmm.
come in as consultant. So I've been at all levels. And I think being a good executive director, it's like scoring a film. If you're doing a good job, people barely notice because everything's
Right.
going great. And it's just leading you into one project, or one emotion or one experience, but it's going well. And it's when things are not good and there are tough choices or you don't agree with the choices that someone's making, maybe you have all the information and they did, like you said, they made a bad choice, they're a bad manager, they're just not, it's the Peter principle or whatever, they just got Dunning-Kruger, who
Hmm.
knows, there's all kinds of things that can apply. But there's also times where we don't have all the information or we can't have all the information or see the big picture.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I've helped repair for clients in those first couple of years of COVID was the executive directors making not well informed or good long term decisions about having to pause and shut down volunteer activities without communicating the why. or the how. So, in
Oh.
2020, in 2020, 2021, even 2022, I was seeing a lot of organizations say, well, we furloughed or paused or put on leave all of our volunteers, and then we left them alone for a year and a half and we didn't communicate, but now we want everybody back. And like, well, that's tough to do. We're going to try. Here's how you can start to repair that trust. But it takes, I've said this a bunch of times before on this channel and others, that,
Hmm.
it takes a long time to build trust and relationships.
Hmm.
And just like one moment or maybe one not great decision or not a well communicated decision, that
Hmm.
can just absolutely break that trust internally with volunteers, with paid staff, and with the community. And I think that executive directors could also learn, because I know that there's some that are subscribed to the channel and they do their jogs and their walks and they listen to the podcast.
Yes.
Hopefully they're listening to your stuff podcast, listening to this, and then going right over to episode 64. Listen to your kid intro in. And but I think it's good for executive directors to expand their knowledge of volunteer services and how valuable that is. But that relationship is important to kind of educate up to leadership of the
Mm.
value of volunteers and the value of volunteer services, and when it needs investment is strategic volunteer engagement. It needs investment, needs intention, needs resources. And the executive director saying, hey, we can't control that we lost a federal grant for half our budget. Hey, let's have a discussion on how we can get through this together instead of, random cuts that can
Mm.
potentially break trust. So I'm hoping that between your podcast, my podcast, and other information that's out there, other research that's out there, that executive directors also learn you can ask for money for volunteer services, specifically in grants. And if you can make your case and prove it with data, or however, you're aligning it with your strategic goals of your organization, funders will say, we'll pay attention and say, oh, if you tell us that you need this and why, okay, then we'll fund strategic volunteer engagement. And there's been
Mm.
really good research around that. So I'm glad to potentially open up a listening session or maybe even a full conversation with between executive directors, development directors, and volunteer services, and how can we all work with other departments as well to for the success of the agency without thinking that volunteers are nice to have or free or an add-on or just a resource to be, ground into a fine powder or paste
Hmm.
without
Hmm.
any regard for that. And I am curious. We had some pre-conversations, and there's a lot of other hot topics. What else has been kind of on your mind, or that you've been going through as a nonprofit professional, and also just finding guests and topics to talk about? What's your hot topic of the moment?
There are two things that are really on my mind. One, return to office. You kind of
Mhm.
mentioned a little bit about that, where it's like, we're all here, we're able to work from home. Now we want you back in the office. I'm just going to go ahead and make a declaration. And I think a lot of people will agree or disagree. I think a lot of return to office politics are bullshit right now.
Absolutely, yeah.
What I see in the nonprofit space, and this happens a lot, whether we really know it or not, where the nonprofit space has the ability to do a lot of innovations, but there are a lot of instances where we're kind of following the trend of others. And that's just what it is when you live in a capitalist society. Let's just be
Yeah,
completely honest.
yeah,
When you put money first versus people first, you're going to have a process of we chase the dollars, i.e., fundraising, grants, trying to get the money instead of trying to help people. That's not our fault in the industry, but that's just a fact of life when you live in Western society.
yeah,
With that said, there are a lot of for-profit industries that are doing return to office, and I think the nonprofit space is trying to do somewhat similar types of actions. And to a degree, they're doing it because of course, there are some spaces where it's hard to take care of animals in the shelter virtually, right?
right, right.
But there's some aspect to this is a really strong opportunity. And the further we get from COVID in the heights of the pandemic,
Hmm.
the sadder I honestly become because there was an opportunity, and I think there still is an opportunity to put the people first. And you might not be able to have your workers be at home 5 days a week. But the fact that a lot of nonprofits are not properly entertaining hybrid schedules and
Right.
being flexible with their workers, I think is disingenuous. I think it's disingenuous. So that's the first thing that's on my mind. Right. I think I have some people that agree with that and don't disagree. The second thing that's on my mind, and I'll be honest, even I'm struggling with this, is AI use in the nonprofit space.
Yeah. I talk
And
about
what
that a lot. Yeah. And the
and
many problems with it. Yeah.
right, and I just
Mhm.
said
Yeah.
in the nonprofit space, we sometimes follow the
Hmm.
trends that are happening. And this is one of those things, Dane, I will admit to your audience is no different for me. I see what's happening in the AI space, and it kind of feels like the dot-com boom, the
Yeah.
industrial revolution. It feels like all of those things of this could be very, very beneficial for the industry, but there are a lot of things around it that are just honestly negative. How do you
Yes.
navigate that? I want to, I think sometimes we can skirt around these things. I'm open to debate from a lot of folks that are going to be listening to this episode. I am in the camp that I want to be able to use that power and use that technology more so than not. But I know there are a lot of people that are not a fan of that. I'm on a lot of Reddit threads, and you can find me on Reddit if you want, the
Hmm.
Nonprofit Insider Podcast. And I say, listen, I'm trying to embrace AI in the nonprofit space, and a lot of people do not like that. I understand that. I'm not trying to argue and make it to one of those things, but I'm right and you're wrong,
Hmm.
because I think every single day there's new information. But those are the two things: return from office and artificial intelligence that are really on my mind.
Yeah, and those are hot topics, in the sector right now. And I, being in Silicon Valley, having most of my friends and
Ooh,
family in
hmm.
tech, and many that work with foundations and nonprofits as well. I have like all my big techie friends, and who are writing the codes and the AIs. The thing that I push back against with what the general public thinks is AI has nothing to do
Mm,
with the number of products that do very different things in very different ways that are under that marketing term. And it is a marketing
mm,
term that was specifically come up with
hmm.
in the 1950s at this little conference. And it could just as easily have been called applied statistics, because that's how it's really been working. So there's applied statistics, there's large language, learning models, there's things like that. The problem, and I agree with you that we had a point in history that could have been a turning point, and powers that be, mostly billionaires here in the West, um,
Hmm.
decided, slapped it down and said no. So we could have put people ahead. We could have had a decent
Hmm.
public health response. We didn't. We could have been utilizing applied statistics and magnifying the ways that that's helpful
Mm.
to people, like in a closed data set. One of my friends is a marine biologist, big data ocean scientist person. She runs a nonprofit called Intertidal. Hi, Kate Wing, talking about you.
Oh.
uh, and and she does big data analysis. But the thing is, you can use what's called AI because it means like a dozen different things doing a dozen different things. But the generative AI or the chat GPT style AI is essentially a scam product that doesn't really work
Really?
well. And I have a whole workshop about this, so we won't get in the conversation. But essentially, there was a point about 5-ish years ago where tech finance hit a moment where there has to be a certain amount of speculation to keep the bubble going. And there has to be something new that
Yes.
the VC funders, the financiers are interested in. And so the shiny thing used to be NFTs. The shiny thing was Bitcoin. The shiny thing was is now AI. Except it doesn't mean what you think it means. But the kind of AI that's being sold at the consumer level or just inserted into your online life, whether you like it or not, that's a kind that is very it's just an extraction and kind of a garbage in, garbage out tool. So with the recent study, and there's a lot of environmental damage. It uses a lot of energy. It uses a lot of fresh water. It ruins a lot of land for people in small towns next to data centers. So there's ways to utilize technology that doesn't have to be harmful to people in the environment.
Oh
And
yeah.
we had that, and including things that are called AI. But the most common products that you see of, including in, video and audio editing, of like, oh, here's some free AI music. Here's this. Here's this. It's really tempting to grab these things because, oh, stuff on the internet is free, and you don't realize
Hmm.
that that has there's a lot of lawsuits now about, well, specific artists, visual artists, and authors are saying, I never gave you permission to scrape my stuff just because it exists on the internet. So you're getting into copyright violation, you're getting into
Of
intellectual
course.
property violation, you're getting into what belongs to whom. At what point does art change so much with a machine that you can't attribute it to the original artist? So I think it's a complicated thing. That's why I do workshops about it. I've done webinars about it to just get people the whole picture. That, and I've
Hmm.
advised some clients and even some friends who've called with AI, like, well, what's you defining as AI? Are you using it in a closed data set where it's not just grabbing random garbage from the internet and including social media and Reddit, and whatever other things? So where's the data coming from? How is it getting its conclusions? How are the prompts written? And if it's a scientific language learning model, LLM, or applied statistics, that's great within a closed data set. Even within volunteer management software, you can get things to like, oh, can you cross-reference this? There's always been code and algorithms that you can write to do that. I'm not a code person, but I can play one on TV, and I have many friends who've explained it. But artificial intelligence and robotics that I have friends working on with, NASA Ames and other industries, that's a completely different thing from, the Facebook or Instagram filter that makes you look like a cat when you're when you're in a meeting. So I start to not quite bristle, but I want to have that conversation, and I'm glad we're having it here, Swim, where it's like there are so many layers to what people don't know AI is or does or could do, that, and the people that are pushing the worst possible use of it for their own enrichment kind of have the spotlight right now. And that's the part that worries
Ooh.
me, is it's enriching the worst possible people who have the worst possible motivations, instead of helping to analyze climate change data, which is what my friend Kate does. Like, more people want to do that. Oh, NOAA's getting shut down. Let's use some of that data in our big data models and see if we can keep up some of this work as a network of small nonprofits, IFMH. So we're talking about nonprofits having to step into a space in the ecosystem and be a new net. If something as big as climate science is getting cut off from in the States as it is, how do Kate and other nonprofits step up to keep that data and that analysis going, in
Yeah.
their closed, very large, but like specific closed data sets, versus, what would I look like as a Scottish fold cat, and that kind of thing. So I'm
Listen, what
glad
you
to
do
have
on a
that.
Saturday night, Dana, is really none
You
of
know
my
what?
business.
Personas are a whole different topic, but
Listen,
that's also big in Silicon Valley. Maybe not with me personally, but yeah, I got plenty of furry friends. It's fine. It's helpless. It's harmless.
I think it's a conversation
Yeah,
that we will continue having. I do
we
feel like,
should have.
unlike,
Yeah,
yeah, I feel like
yeah,
unlike NFTs, I kind of feel like that kind of went away. I think there's still a lot of
yeah. That bubble
Bitcoin
already
crypto.
popped. Yeah,
Yeah, I feel that like cryptocurrency, that's still happening. We've seen that around at the federal administration. There's a lot of conversations with that. But even just you sharing that information, you're, like you said, you're closer to the source, being out there in that Silicon Valley. You've already changed my insights, and that's the information that I think we need to be really getting in the
totally.
nonprofit space, because we're seeing it through one lens of Microsoft's like, we got Copilot, use Copilot, and Canva's like, we have AI, use it, but
Google's
let's take
like,
a
here's
step
Gemini,
back.
here's Gemini, here's Gemini. It's like, no, no,
Right,
no.
let's take
Can
a
I
step
opt out
back.
for a second? Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
and let's really see what's happening. There's
yeah.
no rush.
Right, right. It's like it's any tool in the toolbox. You can use
Hmm.
electricity to run executing someone in an electric chair. You can use
Yeah,
electricity to run your lights. And so we're talking about
yeah.
AI. It's it's a name for several tools in a toolbox that do a lot of different things. And that's why I want to keep having conversations
Hmm.
about and say, oh, never ever use AI. It's like, let's define it first. And then that gets into the tip of the iceberg and these kind of great longer conversations. So I'm glad that sparked this part of our conversation today, because that's also the exchange of ideas. Oh, how is it working for you? Well, what kind of thing, what kind of program is it exactly? And what do you think it's helping you with? That's worth
Hmm.
examining and slowing down, and not just automatically, dismissing any concerns, environmental or personal, about, or any ethical or values based, use of it is gets
Hmm.
pretty complicated pretty
Hmm.
quickly. Let's let the people know how to find you and get in touch with you, or if you have any final thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. First and foremost, go to Apple or Spotify. Just type in the Nonprofit Insider. Just type that in. It's a cat. People ask me about the cat. Long story short, it's my partner's cat. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna put a picture up. And I didn't know what to do. It's the one thing, despite all that planning, Dana, to create the podcast, I was like, what am I gonna do? People like cats. I think in the
Yeah,
nonprofit space, we have a higher ratio of people with cats.
yeah,
Unverified, but
completely
I believe it.
believable unknown fact, but I'll believe it anecdotally at
More
least.
really.
Yeah, cats and the internet, magic. I should magic
It
magic.
does. So
Yeah.
find the Nonprofit Insider Podcast. Just
And
type
I'll
that
link to it in
into
the video description below too, so it's really easy to find you on LinkedIn and
There
find your
you go.
podcast.
People can, of course, find me on Instagram. They can find me on TikTok as well. Same thing, Nonprofit Insider Podcast, Reddit. So if you want to be on the podcast, just reach out to me, find me
Mhm.
or email me, and then let's talk. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, and same thing with this channel. If you're, I have people that are super well known, and others that are just doing cool stuff, and then
Yeah.
later they become well known because I watched them doing cool stuff for a few years and said, would you like to be a guest on this? And if they're nervous or not nervous, I get them through it. But it's cool to watch doing this for almost 6 years, 5.5 years, watching other people's careers progress, because they're getting on podcasts more, they're getting on web series more, they're doing your tips, they're getting their face on camera out there more and more. And I think the more voices we have as leaders of volunteers, or the more
Hmm.
voices we have in the nonprofit sector talking about what's important to them, whatever it is, doesn't have to be the same thing that's important to me, but the more people we have talking about it, I think that elevates the whole conversation, and it's the rising tide that raises all boats. It helps everybody understand more, because if they listen to your show, if they listen to my show, if they listen to us on each other's shows,
Hmm.
great. They'll get those pieces of information that from whatever channel they're tuning into. But I'm so glad to have you as a guest finally, Swim Karim. You do awesome work. I'm so happy for the conversation that we had today, and I want to keep having these kinds of conversations about returning to work, about AI, about other hot topics in the sector. And I look forward to other episodes of your show. Thank you so much, Swim, for being on the show. Everybody tune into the Nonprofit Insider. You can find it in the links below and wherever you enjoy your podcast. And thank you for watching Priceless Advice and Tuesday Tips. And thank you, Swim, for all that priceless advice and Tuesday tips. And we hope that you enjoy this episode. Please share it, like it, subscribe to me, subscribe to Swim. Subscriptions all around for everybody. You get a subscription, you get a like, you get a share. Please all do all that good stuff. And we'll catch you next time with more priceless advice and Tuesday tips. Take care.